So where's that train going? And where has this one come from?
Train storage.
Train storage? Let me explain. When I designed the Yarslow Model Railway, I had two key criteria in mind. I wanted variety of traffic and operational interest. Now these two criteria implied lots of trains running to and from different places on the layout. But in a limited space, even given that I've got 27 by 13 feet, it wasn't going to be possible to provide terminus stations and junctions and through stations for trains to depart from, run through and arrive at. In fact, very, very few layouts do that. So that's why we use train storage, storage sidings, a fiddle yard, call it whatever you want. But we need somewhere to put our trains when we're not running them. It's not prototypical, of course, but imagine that you're watching a play at the theatre. An actor comes on, says his lines, and then walks off stage into the wings, purporting to be going somewhere else. Later, he might come back at a different part of the story before leaving again, perhaps into the wings on the other side of the stage. And so it is with our trains. They're the actors, and the wings are the train storage. But what sort of train storage is there, and which is the best one to use? So there are a number of basic types of storage sidings, and there are styles within those four basic types. But let me walk you through those four or so basic types, and I'll show you how I've used them at Yarslow. Now, the first one, the most basic of all, I think, and probably the most common, are dead-end sidings. Now, they're used on the Yarslow layout to represent the destination of the trains out of Trinity Square, and also some of the other trains that run around the layout, but mostly the Trinity Square trains. These are essentially one line in and then points making up lots of sidings, so they're easy to lay, they're easy to wire up. You can have a dead end section at the end so you can hold the engine, and then an uncoupling device if needs be, and then another engine can come in, hook up to the other end of the train and depart. The exceptions obviously here being if it's a multiple unit, and if you're using DCC, you don't need to isolate engines, of course. The sidings themselves can be curved, they haven't got to be straight, and therefore you can lay them into corners, space that perhaps would be otherwise wasted on the outside of bends. You do need access if you're going to muck around with the trains while they're in the storage sidings here, and if you're going to manually couple and uncouple the engines. And as you can see from this diagram, the outer sidings get progressively shorter. The other problem is that they can take up considerable length. If you're talking about trains of 4 or 6 coaches, it's not difficult to suddenly end up with 6 foot of sidings. And of course, these sidings need point work. And I wouldn't recommend just buying cheap points for your storage sidings. You might want to get away, as I've done here, with very short radius ones, but don't buy cheap. The mainline storage sidings at Yarslow are running loops. Now these are ideal for a continuous run style of layout, and as I've done here with long loops, you can stack trains one behind the other, 2 or 3 in some cases for me. These loops can be curved, they can be placed at lower level even, as long as you don't have to get to them, and they can, if you want to, be laid out in an out and back formation, so you arrive on one line, go around the loop, come out on the other line. If trains have a dedicated berth, as mine do here, each train lives in its own dedicated siding, then automatic sequencing is an option. If that's your thing, if you're into DCC and train control and all the rest of it, and you want to automate your trains arriving and departing from the storage sidings, then this gives you that option. Something that's also worth bearing in mind is that it's useful for delaying trains as well as storing them. Imagine that halfway down my branch line I had a tunnel, and inside that tunnel was a running loop. The train can run into the loop, it can wait there for 20 minutes and then come out. It appears that it's taken forever to go down the branch, but all you're really doing is hiding it. One of the issues, and certainly an issue for me here, is switching trains from up lines to down lines. Now clearly on a single track that isn't a problem because all sidings have access to trains going in both directions, but where I've got a set of up sidings and a set of down sidings here, it means if I want to run an express in both directions I need two trains, so that could increase the cost. And of course, to make the sidings themselves you need lots of lovely point work. That's more cost. The next option, and one that you'll see quite commonly at exhibitions, is a traverser or a sector plate. Here's the traverser that represents the branch terminus for me. This is High Marsh Station, but in fact it's anywhere beyond Blowick Lane on the branch. This is a traverser, the whole thing slides. A sector plate is sort of pivoted at one end and still slides, but only at one end. The traverser is the length of the sidings. They can be any length, although I would warn against having a traverser that's maybe 6 or 8 feet long. It can get a bit unwieldy. And if you are a fan of designs of Ian Rice, you realise that these can be used to serve kickback sidings. So a simple sector plate would allow a train to run onto the plate moves, and then that train runs off somewhere else. You can partly hide these things under buildings, providing you can still get to them at some point. And if you've got space available, clearly with a sector plate, the whole thing can be converted into a turntable. Peter Denny did that way back in the 70s. Again, turntables are great, but bear in mind if it's 6 or 8 feet long, it's going to take up an awful lot of space. The traversers themselves, this one here is straight, but Alan Wright, on his Cheviotdale layout, which featured in the Railway Modeller in June 77, showed a curved traverser. Very clever. There are some snags. They are not the easiest things to build. They're made here out of a tray sitting on DIY draw runners, but getting the accurate alignment can be a problem. My solution to that is quite simple, and that is I built the table, then I built the bolt and the holes, as you can see here, and I laid the track afterwards. A bit of a cheat, but at least it works. Power transfer to the correct track can be an issue. I use a rotary switch and an on-off here, so I make sure that only the right track is powered. And again, if the train is not a multiple unit and it's a traverser or a sector plate, you do need another engine to pull the train out afterwards. Now, given enough space, the good traversers and the sector plates have engine spurs on the front so that you can simply line up the right engine and run it onto the right track. One of my favourite and least favourite sets of storage sidings, all rolled into one, are cartridges, and earlier on in this site from a long time ago you'll find on my old Yarslow layout there's a whole video on cartridges and why I love them and why I don't. Well, why do I love them? Well, many trains can be stored in a small space. Here is the cartridge bay at Yarslow, which doesn't take up very much space at all. It's 6 foot so long and it's 3 inches wide. And here is a rack full of trains. Now there's 7 or 8 sitting here, and you can see that all those trains don't take up any space at all. They sit on the rack above the layout. They can be on a shelf below, what I did before, and you just pull one out, put it in this hole, and then run a train. It's great. You can have as many trains as you like. The cartridges can be different lengths, as these are, and if you wanted to, as I did on my old layout, you can have separate train and loco cartridges so that the engine and the train combination can be changed every time you use them. A couple of negatives: long cartridges can be difficult to handle. If you've got a 6 foot cartridge and you're trying to turn it around in a 7 foot wide shed, I can assure you that at some point you will level off your trees or your signals or something. Power transfer and alignment can be tricky. There's many ways of doing this. I've tried several, and the one I'm using at the moment works for me, but it's up to you as to how you do that. Stock handling can be a problem. In the original video from way back on the old layout, you'll notice that the cartridge which held the stopping freight train had lower sides so that I could get to the wagons and switch them around. These sides are quite low, so it's not so much a problem, but it is a problem if you pick up one of these cartridges and then don't quite get your footing right. If you drop this, you're going to make a mess. And finally, the one thing that for me turned me against them on the old Yarslow layout, they are very labour intensive. If you are running a layout that depends entirely on cartridges, then you're going to spend more time putting cartridges on and taking them off than you are watching your lovely trains go round. So there you go, there's the more common types of storage sidings, and you'll appreciate, as I've shown on the Yarslow layout here, that because they do different things and different jobs, you can have any combinations you like. I've got a traverser, I've got running loops, I've got dead end sidings, I've got a cartridge here. So, you know, they're all required to do different bits. There's no right, there's no wrong. You use whatever you feel you want to use, and that's the beauty of our hobby. Whatever we choose, we're all right, aren't we? And of course there are layouts that do just fine without any storage at all. John Ahern's Madder Valley being one of the classics. There you go. Hope that helps. I'll see you soon.